Hello, my name is Richard Bennett, and to my left is Dr. Kirk Vestal, and this is the subject. And the subject is Wilson's disease. I'm going to introduce my friend. His name is Kirk Vestal, and he graduated from MacArthur High School in 1975. He graduated number 4 in his class, a top 10 graduate, a National Honor Society person.
Should have been number 2.
He should have.
Except I didn't know how the STS classes worked.
And then he went on to, from there he went on to Rice University and graduated Rice in 1979. And from there he went.
That was a mistake.
Why was that?
Oh, all those nerds down there. I wasn't a nerd. I was pre-med, not a nerd.
And then from there you went to medical school in Lubbock and graduated in 1985. And after that, he had a career in medicine. But during this time, while he was going to school, he had a condition, a developing condition that showed up during his college years, which was Wilson's disease. Now, Kirk?
Actually, in the high school, my hands just had a mild tremor.
Tremor, yeah. And you had the grin.
Grin, yeah. Don't remind me of the grin. I still have a grin.
And sometimes it gets you into trouble.
The police always think I'm grinning at them, and they don't like that.
Until you explain to them you have a condition.
They never heard of it.
No, I haven't heard of it.
So they don't give me any space. Some cops are nice, but I'd say about half of the police officers have been nice. Half of them have just made my life hell.
Well, I wouldn't know what Wilson's disease was if it wasn't for you. So explain what Wilson's disease is, doctor.
Well, it's complicated. No one's heard of it except the people that have Wilson's disease and maybe their families. But it is an autosomal recessive disease, which means each parent is a carrier. Usually the parents don't have it, but they're carriers of a bad, faulty gene that deals with copper in the body. And copper, people think, what? We don't need copper. But yes, we do. For 7 of our body's enzymes needs copper. And I could go into the enzymes, but that you'd need biochemistry, so I won't do that. Just enzymes do functions in the body. You need an enzyme to do just most any biochemical change or create energy. And so 7 of them out of probably 100 enzymes in the body, we need some copper. Like hemoglobin needs iron, Richard. And everyone understands that. But so anyway, we get copper from food. And some foods have more copper than other foods. Crustaceans are well known to be high in copper. Lobster, crab, and organ meats, which means liver. I never liked liver, so I was lucky because I never liked liver. But they also, the meat packing houses put liver in various meats that we get, especially in like sausage or hot dogs. You really don't know what's in those things.
Everything.
But anyway, now let's see, where am I at? All right. But in Wilson's disease, copper is absorbed from the gut. There's usually a complicated process where either zinc or copper is absorbed by this particular enzyme in the guts, the inside of our body, in the intestines. And there's zinc or copper are kind of competing with this enzyme to the one that's getting absorbed. And in copper, or in Wilson's disease, copper gets in, and zinc, gets in some, but not as much as it usually should do. And so those of us with Wilson's disease absorb too much copper from the gut. And getting back to the genetics of it, I don't know if people understand, and I can't teach everyone, but autosomal recessive is every disease is going to be more rare than the autosomal dominant, which in that case, you just require one faulty gene and you're going to get the disease. And so like hemophilia is a kind of sickle cell disease is a well-known autosomal dominant disease. But anyway, getting back to the Wilson's disease. Let me see here. So we have too much copper being absorbed in our gut. And you think, well, big deal. Well, excess copper tends to build up in the parts of our body that have more of those enzymes that need copper, because the body's got that all set up. And don't ask me how that happens. But so the copper builds up in areas of the body that usually need some copper more. And there's certain areas in the brain that mainly will absorb too much copper, and I'll get into that in just 30 seconds. It's also absorbed in the liver pretty bad. So most people with Wilson's disease, Richard, it's going to be in these areas of the brain or the liver. All right, so I'll talk about the liver because it's a little bit easier. And then I'll get into the brain areas. So the liver, you basically get cirrhosis. And you start usually in childhood. I'd say it takes a while for this excess copper to get in the system, and it just kind of ruins what's going on. And I think that's what the research going on, that's part of the research going on. Don't ask me much about the exact research, but why excess copper, it's very, it's another thing that you have to get some chemistry, but it's kind of got any positive electrons, which means it has more electrons than most of the surrounding tissue. And so these positive electrons in copper just being there, it pulls in negative atoms that need more electrons. It just kind of distorts, it kind of just destroys where it's at, just slowly but surely. And so usually in adolescence, it doesn't have to be in adolescence, could be just about any age, because some countries don't have much copper in their diet. Am I making this too difficult, Richard?
No, I'm catching
Okay.
most of what you're saying.
Well, I'll try to simplify it.
Dumb it down for me, would you?
I've only had about 20 years of school. Richard's had, what, you've had 12.
Well, yeah.
Well, so it usually would appear in adolescence with liver cirrhosis. And, people are going to think, how did you get liver cirrhosis? You're 18 years old. And you've been drinking? But usually if you're in good health system, you'll get a liver biopsy. And if the pathologist does all the stains that they should see the excess copper. Some pathologists are pretty good and they'll pick that up. If you're at, where the pathologist is old and not well, doesn't remember all the various causes of liver cirrhosis in teenagers, I would think they do, because they know that's pretty unusual. Even if you're a drinker, it doesn't happen when you're 18. And there's a few other diseases that cause cirrhosis, but I don't know. I've forgotten about those. We'll stick to Wilson's disease.
Okay.
So you find out you have Wilson's disease when you're 18 because the doctor stains for copper in addition to other stains. And he finds out, hey, there's excess copper that's destroying this liver in this needle biopsy. And, it's too late. Almost it's too late if that's the case. And I should go back a little bit. Any dysfunction in the liver, let's say an adolescent, if the enzymes are high or something's not going right, a hepatologist may get a liver biopsy. So it doesn't always have to be the end-stage liver cirrhosis. I take that back. It can be a liver on the way to being cirrhotic. But there's something wrong. The things that a liver should be doing aren't being done properly. But anyway, I'll get back. So they start the right treatment, and they might be able just to go on with the stage of their liver disease. Or if it's too bad, they'll need a liver transplant. And that's bad. Anytime you get a transplant, you got to take all these medicines to prevent rejection. But they usually will find a liver for these people. There's not that many people with Wilson's disease. And that, I go back to talking about the genetics here, and then I'll keep going. When I said it's autosomal recessive, 1 in 100 people are carrying that defective gene. And so it's kind of strange. You think, well, how does a mom and dad with only 1 in 100 genes, with faulty genes, when they get married, I would say there's still 1 in 100. So you got 1 in 100 times 1 in 100 chances of having Wilson's disease. And so that's 1 in 10,000 people will have Wilson's disease. Now, if you know the family, like me, I have a son, he has a 1 in 2 chance of being a carrier. If his mom was a carrier, that would mean he had like a 1 in 50 chance. But we won't get into that unless some people have questions. But 1 in 10,000 people, that's not a whole lot.
No.
So doctors just don't think of that.
We don't know what it is. You can tell about your diagnostic. How did the doctors find out about it in you?
Well, first let me get into the places. And
Okay.
I talked about the liver. There's also specific places in the brain. It's not like the whole brain. The basal ganglia is the most what shows up. And the basal ganglia, in case people don't know, kind of controls when you reach your extensor and let's see, I'm having a hard time remembering. Extensor, Richard, I forgot.
Uh,
But we won't worry about it. But
Okay.
the brain has to coordinate, like when I'm going to
are you talking
reach for that.
Depth
There
perception?
has to be extensor and I wish I could remember, but the brain is, there's one area of the brain. It's kind of in the middle of the brain, just kind of like balls, and each ball is made up of separate little, like the caudate nucleus, the putamen. And people with Parkinson's disease are more well known to have a defect in the basal ganglia. And you know what those people, they call that a resting tremor. Well, so it builds up the basal ganglia, and that mostly can cause a resting tremor. It's also an intention tremor. Like if I reach for this, can you see me, you think, on the camera?
Yeah.
So when I reach for something, this is what happens.
You got to zero in on it.
And if you try to sign your name, you can't do it, because it's an intention tremor, they call it. And in Wilson's disease, you have both. And so it's called a mixed tremor. And like I say, that's the basal ganglia. And when it gets really bad, if the neurologist hadn't diagnosed it, you get a bat wing tremor. And I was just starting to develop a bat wing tremor before it was diagnosed. And that was when I was in medical school. And then when it gets really bad, you have chorea, they call it. It's like Huntington's chorea. You can't do nothing with your hands. And it finally gets, or on the way, it gets like your legs. And so you try to walk, and you lose your balance. Your legs don't work right. It's really hellacious. And if it really gets bad, it gets super bad. I'll show you. Somehow the people, they can't speak well. It gets your tongue, you can't speak. And somehow, it gets really bad. I've seen them a lot in conferences.
Bent over.
You just bent over, and then you can't talk, and people, and people, and your life is ruined, basically. And usually you see the parents standing by doing things. And I'm not sure exactly if they go to nursing homes or what, but it's bad. And okay, so it also gets an area in the frontal lobes that's called the prefrontal cortex. And that's probably caused more problems in me than any other single area. And people think, oh, that can't be, but it causes most damage in the judgment, the finer judgment of human relations. And Richard doesn't believe in evolution, but somewhere along the way, chimpanzees, and they learned when they're interacting with their fellow chimpanzees, or Neanderthal man, we'll say that, some of the higher, as we go along, judgment gets good. Good judgment gets good. And that's how those politicians usually get to where they're elected. They know what to say. They know how to interact with people. They just agree with whatever the person they're talking to
What
says.
they want to hear.
And their speech is good. They know exactly what to say and how to look. But people with Wilson's disease, our judgment gets bad. And you say, well, what does that mean? Well, that means like I lost $180,000 in the stock market, playing with the stock market, just because I had a little scheme that wasn't working, but I didn't stop. I kept thinking, oh, it's going to work. It's going to work. As a matter of fact, I have a scheme going on right now. A different scheme.
Well, you have a lot of company.